It's episode 109 of the Author Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. Thanks for listening each week to the Author Stories podcast. I'm very happy to get to bring these interviews to you each week. It's a great pleasure of mine, and I just want to say thank you for tuning in each week. Please go over to hankgarner.com and subscribe to the show. There's a link in the right-hand sidebar. You can go to iTunes and leave a review while you're there. It really does help. Also, please visit our sponsors. The AIPP, the Association of Independent Publishing Professionals, is there to help the people that support the author community. If you are an editor or a cover designer or offer any sort of service like that to the publishing community, go to AIPPonline.org and get connected today and see how you can find people that you can help. Also, ThirdScribe.com helps you as an author take care of all of the stuff that authors have to do but maybe don't want to do, like managing your website and selling books. It frees you up to be a writer. Go to ThirdScribe.com today. Now on to this great interview with my friend Daniel Arthur Smith as we talk about pulp. Thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Right before we started recording, Daniel Arthur Smith and I have been getting into some serious story behind the stories, and maybe we'll bring those to you one day. But I'm very pleased to have my good friend Daniel Smith on the show with me today. And as you know, we've been doing some topical shows lately to mix in with our standard author interviews. And I talked to Daniel a while back because Daniel is in the middle of something really, really cool with the Canyons of the Damned series that he's doing. And there's this really cool resurgence of pulp and of some of the more fantastical elements of fiction. And I wanted to have Daniel on to kind of talk about this and talk about how authors can get started in that and kind of what it means for publishing right now and just all the stuff surrounding it. So welcome back to the show, Daniel.
Hey, thanks, Hank. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so you and I both share a love of weird, fantastical stories. I think both of us tend to write things in that vein. If not exclusively, we tend to think that way a lot of times. What got you interested in pulp and these sort of, and by pulp, you know, we mean stories that kind of harken back to that, well, I'll let you define it, but to me it harkens back to some of the more like Twilight Zone type stories and some of the early serialized fiction. What does it mean to you, and what is it that appeals to you in those types of stories?
So, as you just mentioned, we both have an affinity, but you know what I've discovered is a lot of our author friends, a lot of authors I've just read their interviews, it's kind of like the dirty little secret that they keep in the drawer. Right. You know, even if an author's known for publishing in a certain genre or literary fiction or some other area, their go-to for their fun reading happens to be this type of pulp. And so that was good for you to point out. It was like, what kind of pulp do you mean when you say pulp? Because there's pulp fiction like mystery novels, and there's pulp like detective comics, which of course turned into comic books that we love, that spawned a whole multimedia genre.
Sure.
But the particular area that I've always been very, very taken with is the sci-fi / horror / thriller. And what makes it pulp for me is it has to have that element of cheese. It's okay if it has an element of cheese. It's okay if it's a take on that bit of folklore or urban legend that we all know about. Even if I know what could happen at the end, I still want to read it. I still want to see what's going to happen. So there's that aspect of it that, you know, we first read about in the comic books, like Fantastic Tales and Tales from the Crypt. And we had the Crypt Keeper, and we had what were all of his friends? Remember, there was a Crypt Keeper. There was another cemetery guy. There was like 5 of them. One of them was a demon.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But they were all serving the same stories, and some of them even came back to some of the same places, and they resonate. I remember reading a story from one of the Fantastic Tales about Aleister Crowley, and even though I've learned more about Aleister Crowley and read him again and again and again, when I think of Aleister Crowley, my mind flashes back to the early comic books.
Oh yeah, well, me too. And I think I might have read that story.
I bet you
Yeah, that's so weird that you mentioned that because when I was writing Seventh Son of a Seventh Son last year, I have a character that's built around some of the stereotypical Crowley stories, and you know what I mean when I say that. And I even named him Alexander Crowley, and it was kind of a hat tip to some of that early, storytelling about him and how he was kind of the prince of darkness and all that kind of thing, and it was just a fun kind of hat tip to that. So I think I probably read that same story you're talking about as a kid.
One of the neat things about that story that I remember, basically that story was an origin story of how he had been a great scholar and had traveled the world to find all these mystic artifacts.
Right.
But there was one line near the end of the story where he had brought up a creature, and it had affected him or somebody else. I don't remember exactly, but there was a line of "Do not bring up what you cannot put down."
Right.
And that line in itself resonates with me. There's a side project I've been putting together for my boys, for my children, for quite a while, of just kind of principles of life to go by, and that's one of them. Don't bring up what you can't put down. But that brings it back around to these pulp. The great thing about all these pulp is they're campfire tales. They're stories.
Yes.
They're stories that even if we know how they go, it's okay that they're being retold, because they have a fable to them. They have they could be a fable if it's the animals. It could just be some kind of a we think of like the Grimm's fairy tales, which of course have a big resurgence. But those start in like short, cheesy pulp. It's okay if you know how the story goes, and of course it's even more exciting if we take those elements of Crowley or Lovecraft as another favorite and mix them up in a new way. But the themes always come back kind of the same. It's like, are we going where we shouldn't go? And again, more and more authors that I talk to, particularly since I've been I put together this Tales from the Canyons, that they want in. They're interested. You find out not only do they want to write something, but they have something in the drawer, which I think it's like I got this. I never really knew where to put it. So I think that's fantastic.
Absolutely.
The other thing I like about these kind of pulp stories, and this is one of the things that I've been playing with, is they cover different kinds of media. Of course, you mentioned Twilight Zone. I don't think there's anybody on the planet in any language practically that hasn't been exposed to the Twilight Zone in one incarnation of the other, either the Rod Serling originals or the new
feature films
or the new stories. And all of them, even though the stories may vary, they aren't all necessarily a horror. Some of them are eerie, some of them are horror, some of them are discovery, some of them are magical. But what some of them have is they have a theme where the story is explicitly going back to the same character, but from the environment, maybe it's one of their space theme stories, that they are going back to the same world in the Twilight Zone. And then we see that again with the Outer Limits. We see a revisiting. I remember in the new Outer Limits, that when they released that 10, 15 years ago, that there was several stories having to do with androids. But they're always the same type of android and the same similar actors. They were wearing the same uniforms, even though it was a totally different story. So it was pulling together a universe in and of itself, even though each story was a standalone story. I find that utterly fascinating as well.
Yeah. A lot of those stories tend to play on a fear that we have, maybe personally or as a shared societal thing. Like you said, a lot of these are fables, and they seek to teach a lesson of sorts. In there, what do you think it is about kind of touching on these primordial emotions or insecurities or fears that we have?
Well, we could go into Joseph Campbell and the power of myth and talk about
yeah.
the necessity of the hero's journey and
Right.
how these archetypes are important to us all, or you could even take away from just the mere importance in the fact that it's impossible to escape the archetypes, that there are only X number of stories that could be told, and that you're going to, it isn't so much that like, oh, well, yeah, you're going to have to tell the story of the lovers or whatever. It's something different than that. It's like these archetypes are almost hardwired. That we need to know them, that we need to pass on this information. We need to pass along the story of the dreamer or the striver, or we need to warn of the bad guy, or we need to be careful of what's over the precipice, but be willing to take the step over it. And whether we're doing it consciously or unconsciously, that story needs to be passed on. But I think that some of that is very on purpose. The other tradition of pulp, I was just mentioning Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits, which of course were very popular and very, very big worldwide. But most of the magazines that we've stylized Tales and the Canes after, and some of the other magazines that are out now, are based on magazines that came out in the 40s and 50s and 60s that were basically just pure entertainment. And the people publishing to them, although some of the names ended up big, these were people that were just pumping out content to feed themselves. And so I think they may have subconsciously hit on these things, or they may have actually been going through a punch list of like, I could tell this story. How would I tell it? I think, who was on your show recently that was talking about a similar thing? Russell Blake.
Yeah. Also, Lawrence Block told a little bit about writing those early noir stories.
Yes.
Stories. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
You just had a couple people on there that were basically talking about how, before Asimov was Asimov, before King was King, Stephen King, Arthur C. Clarke, Robert Heinlein, these guys were among many. Roger Zelazny. These were all people that started in short form fiction.
Yeah.
All of them. Even that many of them are known for their novels, or some of them are just known for their movies. People didn't even know they wrote novels, but they all wrote short stories. And these were the short stories that were populating the news racks, on the street corners. And they weren't paying a lot, so these people were just writing a ton of them again and again and again and again. And I think in order to be picked up, you had to have something to say, and whether or not you were using. Well, actually, let me before I go into saying that, let me say it very explicitly. I think at that time, and maybe it's no different than today, I think you had to use some form of masking to get your story across if you wanted a point. So that pushed the creativity of that content.
Yeah, there seems to be, and like you said, there was this huge market where for short fiction, and it seems to me that even though that never went away, maybe the demand of the market, or maybe it was publishers shifting away from that, that tended to have a big slump over a few decades, and there's a big resurgence of that now. Indie publishing obviously has had a major impact on that because people like you, people like Sam Peralta, and several others, are putting together these collections and banding together people. And some of the biggest book launches we've seen lately are these collections of short stories. What do you think it is about short fiction that is really catching the attention of readers these days?
Well, I don't think that it's something that's really catching the attention of readers. I think you hit the nail on the head. There was something that publishers couldn't maintain on the same business level that they were with other products, because business is business. And as publishing shifted from small independent publishers in New York and San Francisco, places that were putting out these short fiction pieces to the bigger publishers, not even the big 5 we have today, let's say the big 20 of 15, 20 years ago, right? They found that they could get more of a return by either packaging public domain stories like Three Musketeers, right? Or by packaging a new author or two and package them very big, like Stephen King, of course, is a famous, John Grisham, a few of the heavies. And they just discontinued making these short fiction publications because there just wasn't enough return with those. And the great thing about indie is because, for Tales of the Canyons, the only payout on that is authors get paid, but I'm not paying rent on a building in Manhattan. Even though I live in Manhattan most of my time, I'm not paying for space in Manhattan. I'm not paying for an administration team in Manhattan. I'm not paying for an art team in Manhattan. I'm not paying, all these things that became part of the publishing process, like you said, a couple decades back, that just made the cost so inhibitive. So now the only cost is, like you yourself have submitted to Tales of the Canyon. So you get paid for your story. Then we have an editor. The editor gets paid. And, we've all chipped in on the artwork, which makes it part of the fun because that's part of the big, retro thing is to do the artwork. And so we're able to put out a product for, a fraction of the cost. And, to carry that over, that also goes with the ebook, of course. But then even with the print, in which these books, as well as other short forms from, you mentioned Samuel Peralta, and there's a bunch of others I'll mention in a moment. But their prints have also done really well. And why? Because they haven't had to print off 10,000 copies up front and stock them.
Right. These
are on-demand. It's on-demand publishing. And I think that is the key to enabling the proponents of short-form fiction to curate it and get it out there.
And there's a certain level of collectability to some of these. You mentioned the print versions. These are things that people want to have a copy of and put on their shelf in the same way that people are rabid comic collectors and some of the old pulp magazines. And, you get it as much for the cover art and the kind of spooky, kitschy kind of packaging, as you do for the authors that you love and collecting. These are very tangible things that you want to hold in your hand.
Oh, very much so. And that's on purpose, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's on. But the great thing about that is that came from a place of love for the medium,
Right.
And I looked at the last few issues and I realized that in a hurry to get the last couple issues of Tales out, I've gotten a little lazy on the font. I'm like, man, for the next issue, we really got to hit it out of the park, And it's things like that I think really keep the readers happy. And
absolutely. As a writer yourself, and you have a kind of a running thread through your Canyons episodes that you put out. Is it different for you writing short fiction than writing long fiction? And on the surface, of course, there's a difference. But as a storyteller, how do you approach these two forms differently? Say, like the Somali treasure, or or one of your short pieces. Do you approach these differently?
That's a great question. So, who was it? Who was just Hugh Howey.
Yeah.
I was Stephen Bowles, great friend of yours and mine, and I and John Frater were fortunate enough to have dinner with you a week or so ago, and he was talking about this, that you'd think that the short form would be easier because it's only 10% of the size. Say 30 pages as opposed to 300. But no, because you still have to build the whole world, right? And you still have to have all the characters. You still have to do all of these things. So in no way is it necessarily easier just because it's compact. And I thought that was rather insightful way to look at it. Particularly it's 10%. Because I'm like, I guess it is kind of 10%. Not as a rule, but
Yeah.
But the interesting approach that I have though to my novels. So I've written 5 novels. I have 3 of them out, another 2 coming out. And of the 5 novels I've written, all of them have short stories that I've done as workshopping, I guess you'd say. And some of them are just a matter of, like maybe a paragraph or 2, maybe a character study. Some of them are rather elaborate. Some of them go on and on. Maybe too long. Some of them are exciting and can be standalone, can be released by themselves. Now, this is different than I know we have friends. I've done it too, where somebody writes a novel or a series, and then for an anthology, they may release a short story that fits in that universe. Recently, you and I were involved in the Clones anthology, and Raisa Walker included a special short story that was written from the perspective of a character that fans of her series, which is a very popular series, the Chrono series, people will have been asking for that. So I find from my place, I'm not doing that so much on purpose, on demand for others. I'm doing it more for myself, to learn about the universe and to build out the universe. Now, the problem with that is I have a short story that I wanted to release here soon that turned into almost a novella, but there's so many references to it, to a novel in a world that I have yet to release, that the editor's like, you can't release this because it's just abstract. It's talking about parts of the world that, if I go into them into the short story, that short story is going to become, or novella is going to become a novel, right? And so it needs to have that bigger piece out there first. But I know what it is because I did it in and of myself. At any rate, I'm getting far out on a tangent there. To go back to what you said, is there the difference there? Yes, it's a difference, but I use it's a difference because it's trying to consolidate something in a shorter form, like you said, which is the obvious. But I use it mostly as a way to improve my craft. And I don't think I was as good at short stories when I first started on them years ago. I think I've gotten far better at them. But even now, I think I fall into releasing slice of life stories rather than a short plot. Do you know what I mean by that?
I know exactly what you mean. And for me, writing short stories, you need to get a couple of things right really quickly. Like, for one, you need to drop the person into the story immediately and hit the ground running. There's, when you have a quote unquote budget of 5,000 to 10,000 words, there's no prologue that tells a little bit of world building, and then you're introduced to a character in chapter 1, and then about chapter 3 you've set up a point of tension for that character. No, you've got to, on opening page, drop the reader directly into something, and you've got to do it in an engaging way that makes them want to go, what's going on here? How do I do that? And short fiction also makes you really think about writing a great hook that gets your point across, that gives the reader an oh wow factor, and you don't have time, or you have more time than you need in a novel to do that. In a short story, you've got to learn to get those things right and get them done quickly.
You make that sound so easy.
It's not easy. It's not easy at all. That's why we struggle with it. That's why when someone says, we've got this anthology, it's now March, we're going to publish in December. You've got 6 months to work on a story, and everybody turns their stories in on the 6-month mark.
Well, it is. But there's a lot to what you said there. I think what makes a good short story, if you will, of standard fare, particularly for pulp. Let's just keep it in pulp, because that's what we're talking about today.
Right.
Is you have to have the plot. You have to immerse the people. You have to have a situation, and then you have to have an ending that kind of blows them away. Now, not everybody likes that. I tell you that some people really like to have long form, and they're freaked out when the story just ends. They're freaked out.
Right.
But that is part of the. That is part of it. Well, that is the challenge. Not part of that is the whole challenge. That's the whole challenge. I have to say that I think the master of that particular task is Ray Bradbury.
Oh yeah.
Ray Bradbury can tell an entire story in 3 pages. Take you there, create a world, give you a conflict or dilemma, and then end it and I have a couple of the stories where I just go back and like, how did you do that? How did you do this in 1,500 words? How did you do this in 2,000 words? It's, but,
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
but that's one of the reasons why I should mention that for Tales, we offer that, we offer that. It's like, if you can tell the story in 500 words, tell the story in 500 words. Don't drag it out.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that one thing that I love about pulp is the freedom, the ability, almost the necessity of writing open-ended stories. And by that I mean, like you mentioned a minute ago, when sometimes people read some short and fiction and it just ends, and they're left a little disoriented or a little disconcerted by the fact that the story just ends. But for me, I love writing stories that don't necessarily completely resolve at the end, that leaves the reader to think about it and to keep ruminating on the story for days on end. I did that with Writer's Block when I published that short story. It was meant to be a short story, and that's all, and it was open-ended at the end. And then people started asking what happened to it, and then it lent itself to expanding. But not all do, and I would never do that with every short story. I think some things are meant to just kind of float out there and let the reader decide what happens next, or not know what happens next. It should be one of those things that is in the back of your mind, nagging at you for a few years afterwards. I think that's a great pulp story.
That is. I like something that keeps you itching.
Yeah.
It's gosh, you have me kind of thinking about that, of like, what's the delineation? Because one of the things I hate to hear is there's a right way and a wrong way. And again, that's the beautiful thing about pulp, is there is no necessarily wrong way. But I think what separates it, though, is that you do have that. I think it's very plot driven as opposed to character driven. I'm thinking, I also write short stories that aren't that, and I'm thinking those fit into my magical realism bucket.
Sure.
And go ahead.
How do you differentiate in the pulp and the magical realism? Because there's a lot of crossover there.
I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about it. I mean, you raised some really good points because, and I'm not just talking about like, oh, well, magical realism is, now we're high and mighty or anything like that. No, I'm thinking about what is the difference, because you talked about like, well, no, with pulp, I want to be immersed. Okay, check. I want to have a plot. I want to have an ending that kind of like, it's like the alien was defeated, but then we realized that, there's the nest and there's a million more, or that wasn't even the mothership, you know what I mean? Or something like that, or they're already here. I mean, you got good pulp has that kind of a snack to it, but your magical realism is, I think that is a bit more of a character driven, and that's where that slice of life stuff falls into. Of course, it has to have a fantasy element. Yeah. And that could be, I think that's the crossover you're talking about, maybe?
Yeah, the fantasy element, the sort of fantastical meets real world, where, we've got this kind of ethereal nature of reality, and I think there's a lot of crossover in those elements.
Well, I'm going back through my mental Rolodex. I remember a discussion I had. So when does magical realism become pulp, I think, is a better way to frame it. So I know there's a show that you don't like to watch, but that leaves you and like maybe two other people. It's called The Walking Dead. But to the writers, which I do watch this show, I've read the comic book and I watched the show, and the writing is, they hire a great team of writers.
Sure.
And they put it together really well. And my wife doesn't watch it either, by the way. She doesn't like the gore. I mean, it's very gory,
Right.
But the themes of the story, it's magical realism. It's a reality, and something fantastic happens. What if all of a sudden one day people stop dying, but they aren't down here, or however we describe this. It's kind of left
Right.
open. And in fact, in the show, part of the artistic license there, or the artistic thing, is they call them walkers. They never call them zombies, and that's part of the nuance, right? Is what is happening with these people? It's alluded to in the comic book that it could be a disease, it could be, among many other things, and the entire show is in comic book. It's kind of about the nightmare of an American family, and everything else is used as metaphor until the point where it's not even metaphor anymore, right? So I think now, is that a horror or is that magical realism? I would argue that that's textbook magical realism.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that for sure.
Even though it's gory,
Yeah.
There's a who wrote Blindness by this is where I'm not the encyclopedia I should be. Blindness by what's his name? He's Jose Saramago.
Okay.
I had to look at my bookshelf. So he's a Portuguese writer of magical realism, and he's written things. In Blindness, people just start to go blind. Again, could that be pulp? Yeah, it's pretty close.
Yeah.
What happens when everybody around you, and people just slowly start going blind, one by one by one by one. Like it's like a cold. People just get it or something, and then they start going blind. But of course, his stories, and I think it's the other crossover too. I think his story has a strong social message, and good magical realism has strong social messages of what happens with the breakdown society. I guess we could revert back to Walking Dead. I think that fits well into pulp too.
And pulp takes that concept. But then allows you to carry that further. That the magical realism that seeps into the real world can also just completely take you to another world. I think that's where pulp, where we start differentiating, is the magical realism needs to be rooted in realism, obviously.
Oh yes, it does. It does. I mean, that is the thing. It has to be rooted in contemporary real society.
Right.
That is
whereas pulp is open-ended, and you can take that wherever you want to take it.
Right.
So that's cool.
It can be in the future. I mean, there's a whole element of the science fiction aspects of pulp. Where, we can be, everything could be happening on a moon base, or in another dimension, or bridging two dimensions. There was a story recently in one of the tales by S. Eliot Brandes. Brandes.
Yeah.
I'm horrible pronouncing names.
Me too. Don't feel bad.
He's a great author, and in his story, he talked about an island with people there, and there's a sacrifice that happens, and it's exploration into that. And it's a great story. I don't know where that takes place. I don't know if it's now. I don't know if it's in the past. I don't know if it's in the future. I don't know if it's on another planet. But you're automatically drawn into the story where it really doesn't matter, right?
Right. I love things that I love to write are stories about other dimensions and things that are leaking into our world. I'm fascinated by by some of the science, some of the pseudoscience, and where those things mix with religion, and how there are common threads among, there are more things in common with people that believe the ancient astronaut theory and some of the old spiritual mystics. They're very similar threads there if people would just sit down at the table and talk with one another. And I like to explore those kind of things about where the barrier between these things start to dissolve, and the weirdness that happens from there. And I love that when you first approached me about submitting a story, I said I know exactly the story I want to tell, and like you said, a lot of other writers kind of have something in the drawer, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm just looking for a place to do this. So that's awesome.
Well, all right, so what you hit on there, so we were talking before about archetypes, which, has been talked about at length as far as storytelling. I mean, there's the hero's journey for storytelling. But I think that when you bring in, into pulp, whether you're talking about dimensions that are leaking in or religiosity, I think, did you coin that word? Was that, I don't know where that word came from.
I'm pretty sure I heard it somewhere, but I'll take credit.
Maybe it was another friend of mine. I like it. But the religiosity, whether it's Judeo-Christian or something that reflects what we know of as Judeo-Christian, like some kind of priesthood, that we've seen that again and again in pulp, right? Like it may not, the priests of the temples of Syrinx, we don't know exactly what that is, but it seems kind of Judeo-Christian-y,
Right.
And then we have, also it could be on the demonic side, a word I shall not say. The word we shall not speak, right? Like
the darkness.
The darkness, right? Like Lovecraft and Crowley. And I think that when we write to that, we're kind of writing fan fiction to those archetypes, and we're closing the distance with the reader, and that's a whole area to kind of bring it full circle. I said I think there are many authors that have an affinity to this. That's kind of like even romance authors. I don't care. I mean, you ask them, and that's maybe their dirty little secret. They like a little bit of pulp sometimes, or their own form of pulp. Maybe even their romance. Maybe they maybe that's it. But the key to pulp is it takes the distance away from the writer and the reader. And that's the key. You have to have something that the reader, the 12-year-old reader, can understand, as well as the 22-year-old reader and the 32-year-old reader and the 52-year-old reader and the 72-year-old reader. They all can relate to it just the same. You don't need to go into a ton of details about how the rocket ship works.
Yes.
I mean, if you look out onto the sea of rocket ships heading towards Mars, you know exactly what's going on, and you've closed that distance.
Right. And I want to come back to that in just a moment, because I want to compare a book like Clones to what you're doing in Canyons. But before I get there, speaking about the lots of writers have this desire to write pulp. I have 3 daughters, so there are times when I will be subjected to a chick flick, at home, and I don't really have a vote.
Oh, I have one wife, and that happens on a regular basis.
Right. Okay. Well, I live with 4 women, so you can imagine how that compounds exponentially. But we were watching a movie that was based on a book by that guy. His name eludes me, that writes the romance books. He wrote The Notebook.
Nicholas Sparks. I love Nicholas
Sparks.
Oh, come on. You haven't read a ton of Nicholas Sparks? I love Nicholas Sparks.
I've read through some of this stuff, but this one in particular, and the name escapes me. I'll think of it in a minute. But it's this love story. But at the end, you realize that the woman who is new to the town and has made a friend, the friend she made is actually a ghost, who was her new romantic partner. It was his dead ex-wife, and she's befriended her. And you just threw this whole pulp twist right there at the end of a standard romance. And I was like, oh, that's genius. That's you could tell he was itching to tell one of those stories, and he just slid it right into his standard.
I don't know that particular story. Now I'm gonna have to look it up. So it's interesting he's using that one.
I'll find it.
But that is kind of the twist. He always has the twist.
Right.
He always has the twist. I remember some of the. Well, of course, I don't want to do spoilers on your show. But
spoiler alert.
Spoiler. But the Notebook, of course, we have the big twist there near the end. And, that we find out that what that story is really about after going through that incredible love story, and who wasn't moved by the Notebook, and that built Nicholas Sparks' career. But even Message in the Bottle, you go through this great relationship, and then something occurs near the end where you're like, no, it's and if you haven't seen it, the movie or read the book, and with Four Women, you have to have seen the movie. Message in the Bottle.
I've seen them all. I've seen every one.
But I think that's basically I'm affirming that's exactly what you're saying. You're exactly right. I think that's exactly what's happening, man. I think that he knows where his bread is buttered, so he's he's going for the romances, but to keep it a little less cookie cutter, he always has the twist, but he tries to at least keep the twist interesting. And
that's right.
And that's probably that part of him. But
yeah, Safe Haven was that movie / book.
Oh.
So yeah, check it out.
I won't. I will. I'm sure my wife will get it to me sooner or later. I don't have to actively search these out.
Right. I'll email it.
Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, sooner or later, these come on our radar. It's like, how come we haven't watched this shit? Oh, I had it queued, honey.
I had it queued. I was waiting for you to express interest. Right.
She's gonna listen to this. I should watch this.
Oh, Susan, I'm batting for you. So,
right.
So to shift gears just slightly, you talked a minute ago about that there are stories where we're talking about a Mars mission and we're going to get knee deep into the science of the Mars mission, and then there are pulpy stories where we just launch right into the action and we understand how that's working without needing to build that world. You recently published Clones, the anthology, which is more science fiction, and some of the stories leaning toward hard science fiction. Stories like mine, not so much, because I'm not a hard science fiction writer, never will be. All of mine, I'm kind of like Nicholas Sparks in that I'm looking for that hook. That's kind of my thing.
Now that you've made the comparison out there, you are kind of Hank Sparks Garner. A little bit.
I'm not endorsing that, but I'm not going to shy away from it.
I think if you let it happen, it could happen. You don't have a lot of. Usually, I should say you don't, because in Clones you do, and that's probably what you're getting at. But you usually don't have a lot of strong women and men both. And yeah.
I haven't really thought of that. That's interesting. Yeah, we'll explore that. But in the comparing these two things, Clones and Canyons are two very different things. Clones has done tremendously well since it came out, and has a different group of authors, the ones that are more inclined to science fiction and hard science fiction. How is that different for you in putting together these collections? And was it different in the editing and the recruiting authors and that sort of thing in helming a project like that?
Yes, it's different across the board. For one thing, there's a lot more freedom in the pulp. So with Clones, that was invitation only. That there was it sounds so mean to say that, but we were looking for a certain, we didn't want carbon copies of stories, but I was curating, and so I wanted to put together a theme, and I wanted to have Hank Garner's take, and I wanted to have Risa Walker's take, and I wanted to have Sue Quinn's take, and so it was, and not everybody accepted the invitation, and there were a couple people that did accept, and then the real tragedy in my mind is because of undue circumstances they weren't able to follow through the submission, which I'm like, because they would have been, and I won't. I'll tell you offline who that was, because you'll be like, oh man, I would have loved to have seen that, But when you're going down that route, particularly with some of the authors in Clones, invitation only, you're inviting them to a party and you're promising them that this is going to, you're painting a picture and you're saying it's going to look this way, and I really, really want you to come play in my sandbox. And so there's a higher lean on the editing to make sure that everybody's kind of going towards that view. And so even with the bigger authors, if you will. I mean, everybody's a kind of decent human being, but there are some people that have had a great deal of success participating in clones, but everybody got the same harsh editing, you know. they all, and you just aren't going to get that in Canyons, you know. In Canyons, if you say something silly, it's like, yeah, okay, man, that's cool, you know. but in clones, we're like, well, you know, are you sure that's how you want to say that? Are you sure that's, you know, are you sure? You know, there was, I'm not going to, you know, put that author out, but there was an author that we said, man, I think you really want to cut that whole chapter because I think what you had is better with a shorter amount of words. I think you're more succinct. So we cut a whole chapter out of somebody's story for clones. You know, that's pretty heavy hitting. You know, that's way different in the editing process. So I think that I'm trying to stay away from words like professional because both are professional. They're both well done. You know, they both are great content, but it's just the way that the content is treated. And I think it's because of what kind of product we want to have finished overall. I think the word that I would like to use then is refined. Clones, the anthology, is a very refined curation. I think when you go through it, you kind of feel a journey through it. It's one of the better anthologies that I've read. As far as
me too.
As far as composition, I really feel that things tied together.
What's very cohesive is what I've heard several people say, that it's a collection of stories that reads like a book.
Yes, and that's what we were going. Thank you for the words, man. You think I was a writer lacking, but no, it is, and that's really what we're going for with this group. Now with Canyons, I really don't. I really want there to be a story about an alien and then jump to a story about a mist and a fog. Yeah, and then I want to jump to a story about a swamp monster or a ghost or whatever the case may be. And that's okay because that's how pulp is supposed to be. Pulp is supposed to be kind of whiplash. Pulp is supposed to be something that you flip through. Pulp is supposed to be something that you can kind of keep by the bed and, you know, you read a story and then you put it down, you know. Or have it anywhere, and that's also why we don't put more than 4 or 5 stories in any one of those editions, you know.
Right, and I see that. I see that, and you're right. When you look through the old comics and the old pulp magazines, it's really a smorgasbord of it's a buffet of literary goodness that just bounces you all around and leaves you happy at the end.
I mean, the themes, again, that we're seeing so far in 6th edition. Well, I guess I haven't released the 6th yet. Maybe, I don't think it'll be out by the time this airs. But in the 6th edition so far, I've taken it to task to tell stories in a particular world that eventually will be released in a Super Canyons book, like in a novel, or just something just with all those together. Other authors have talked about releasing stories that are tied together, not necessarily as a serial, but in the same world. And they've asked me explicitly, "Hey, are you going to release something, you know, together, or could I release these together?" And I've said, "Oh yeah, sure." And then you yourself, I don't know if you've announced it yet, but you're putting together.
I put together a trilogy that will eventually release as a branded Canyons collection of these stories that I'm really excited about.
Right. So, and I'm excited about it too. I should say I'm curious because you've been a great contributor. I love your pulp. So there've been those themes, but in that way, it's you know, it's like getting out old heavy metal magazine, man. You know, it's like you get some new stuff and some fun stuff, but then you get to go to what was it, Razor X? Was that the cat that was when we were in high school? I forget.
I think so.
Yeah, man. You know, you gotta have. So it's nice to have like the continuities in there. Now it doesn't have to be like I'm doing a continuity now. It's probably going to be done. I mean, I don't know. We'll see. I'm probably going to run through it in another few issues, and then release something with extra content that ties it all together. But what I'd like to see is somebody else kind of pick it up with some new, like you have your trilogy coming out. So then I'll have some issues running, you know, that'll tie together the next few issues. And then as I mentioned, there's other authors have asked about, so maybe they'll tie together some issues. And then on top of those, then you'll have a ghost story, or then you'll have a space story. A.K. Meek, Tony Meek, A.K. Meek,
Yeah.
Anthony Meek, he was the first to put a blatant alien story in number 5. It has the cover of the guy screaming like crazy.
Oh yeah.
And the great thing about
that's an amazing cover.
Well, that cover was originally done by Tony, and then I took it and I warped it all up and added like some flair to it. His face, the one he gave me, he had the original mist, and he had some flares in it, like solar flares, and then he had but the face was just like a regular human-sized face, and it was like pale, like black and white. So I took it and I made it long and tweaked it. So it was a collaborative effort, is where I'm going. But his story was an alien story that's different than anything I've read before. It's intriguing. I'm curious to see if he's going to do others with this, either for Canyons or in his own series. And I believe he's putting together an anthology of his own dealing with aliens. But
nice.
that one, I don't even know if you've read it yet. That's Thoughts as Water. And so spoiler alert, the alien sees emotions and all that emanating from people as water. And it's
that's awesome.
It's pretty far out. It's
I haven't read that yet, but it's on my Kindle to be read. R.D. Brady sucked me into another book, so I'm finishing hers. As soon as I do, that's.
Did she give you a copy of Alive yet? Did you get a copy?
No, not yet.
I don't.
Hint.
Yeah.
Hint,
No.
if
she's listening, I don't have one either. I gotta email her.
Yeah. So Daniel, we've been going for almost an hour now, and I want to bring this around to something practical here at the end. You are doing tremendous work with Canyons and giving authors a great platform for this, and really kind of stoking the fires for this. But if there's an author out there who maybe is a fan of this kind of fiction, maybe thinks, I might have a story like this in me, what advice would you give them for maybe letting their hair down a little bit and giving themselves the freedom to do this? Or is there something specific that you've learned in doing this that you might think would be helpful to an author wanting to get into writing pulp?
That's a great question. So not even just writing pulp, short form fiction overall is an excellent gateway to introduce yourself to readers. It's a great opportunity to get a book out into indie publishing, whether you utilize Amazon's KDP program or one of the other programs. In fact, I'll go through a list of why I think this is so important for a new writer to experiment with. Number one is the time that it takes to put together a story, a short form story versus a novel is ideally not as much time and not as much expense. So you can put it out and kind of test the waters without jumping off that cliff that you would with a novel. You put a novel out and you're not prepared, that's a novel, man. That's a lot of time and effort. Right. So number one, I think that's an excellent avenue for authors to look at. Authors should be looking at other anthologies. At the time this will air, I think the cutoff might be late, but as of yet, I'm not doing another full anthology. But there are always submissions to Tales from the Canyons, and this is not as they call it for your love market. Although they separate for your love markets from paid markets, saying that for your love market is a market you submit to that you don't get paid. I find that I love it anyway, so I don't think that's a good delineation. But Canyons is a paid market, It's 3 cents a word up to $1.50 for new stories. But then we also do, in tradition of the old magazines, we also do republish. So even if you have a story that's been published before or that nobody's reading it, you can go ahead and submit to Canyons. There are a number of magazines out there or anthologies that are coming about. Ernie Lindsay has a mystery magazine coming out, for example. I had the full list, now I can't find it, but there's about half a dozen anthologies coming out of short form. And even though these anthologies I have in mind already are full, it's just a catalyst for more anthologies to be put together. So I would suggest to any new author to look for anthologies that are being put together and, submit to them. So number one, go ahead and if you're a new author particularly, just try to put something up on KDP, test the water. 2, look for anthologies that share that genre. Get them out there. And then 3, the last thing I'll say, the reason why I have tales is we were talking before about sometimes you want to be able to tell a story and you don't want to spend 4,000 words or 10,000 words. Now, if you try to release that story by itself, because the pricing schemes with Amazon, you have to price it the same as a longer story, and sometimes readers aren't as receptive to that.
Sure.
So the great thing about Amazon is you can go ahead and build something yourself, and that really is what was the catalyst for creating the tales. Is I had a bunch of short stories that were just too short to release by themselves, so I said, what am I going to call this when I put it into a collection? And that's was the first tales. And so I would encourage any author, if they have a group of short stories, you can build it yourself. It's indie publishing, and the key word there is publishing.
Excellent. And let's not forget that Kindle Unlimited is becoming a very real factor in readers that have the ability to just keep browsing through and picking up things at random that maybe they wouldn't have given a chance to earlier. But since it's not coming directly out of their bank account, they can get your story, read it, and by having those things published out there, you're gaining new readers. So there's lots of things that are really opening the door for authors, and short fiction is a great way to get your name out there in multiple instances to catch the attention of readers.
Thank you for mentioning that. I forget to mention Kindle Unlimited, and it gets rather controversial, but at this point, I have all my books on Kindle Unlimited. And
so do I. I can't see a reason not to at this point. Yeah, man,
people read it. People read that stuff. It's amazing.
And the big turning point for me was that I realized one night that I lay in bed at the end of every day with my Kindle, and I browsed through the Kindle Unlimited selections, and I've had several guests on the show that I've discovered that way. And I realized if I do this, I know countless other people are too, and that was a real game changer for me.
Oh yeah, well it does. It opens up opens up opportunity. I mean, yes, same.
Yep. So, Daniel, my brother, thank you for coming on the show. This has been a lot of fun. Hopefully, our listeners have learned a little something about our beloved subgenre, and hopefully more people will get excited about it and start doing it as well.
I'd like to see that. I before we go, I should mention that there's 2 ways that I read. There's sometimes I like to read nonfiction and just get all educated and heady, or sometimes I like to read the classics and the words are so beautiful, and sometimes I just like some good junk food, pulpy, fun stuff, and I enjoy reading pulp, and I want to see more. I'd love to see more. So I encourage people to put stuff out there, and feel free to email me and tell me when you put something out there. I'd be happy to go to my Kindle Unlimited and read what you have, because like most writers, we're just readers on crack.
That's right. That's right. Daniel, tell everybody where they can find Canyons and all your other work.
They can be found on Amazon.com. The print editions can be found on all of our good bookstores, which is IndieBound, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. And you can find out more about what I'm doing as far as in the writing arena at danielarthursmith.com.
Excellent. And in the show notes of this episode, look down below the notes, and you'll see a big banner where you can click on it and go pick up all the Canyons books. Thank you, Daniel, for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Brother Hank.